Hi everyone, in the last video we deployed our Homey API REST service to our cluster, but we couldn't access it except by port forwarding, and that is not gonna work in the cloud. So in this video what we're gonna do is we're gonna install an ingress, and you're gonna be able to hit Homey API via a URL. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned and let's go. If you recall in the past video, we had to do some port forwarding here. So for this Homey API, we had to press Shift F in K8s and then go down here and press OK, and that would forward to port 8080 on our computer. But what this does is it accesses the container directly. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that in the cloud. So what we really need is we need some way into the cluster from the outside. That's called an ingress. So there are a few steps that we have to do in order to get that ingress up and running. The first step is to get a certificate, a TLS certificate. So this is something, if you go to an HTTPS website, which, well, most of them are now, and you look in the top left corner by the URL, you can click on that little like shield icon and it'll give you some information about the certificate for the website. Well, that is something that we also need. We need a TLS certificate for our ingress. Now, theoretically, you don't need it, but I mean, in the real world, you're gonna need a TLS certificate, so we're gonna do that here. Once you have a certificate, you have to add it as a secret to the cluster, so we're gonna do that. That is step number 2. And then install the NGINX Ingress controller. Some people say Nginx. I feel like it's NGINX, but maybe I'm wrong. Someone correct me in the comments. Once you install the Ingress controller, you can then create an ingress for the Homey API service, and then we're going to be good to go. All right, so let's start with step number 1, which is creating the certificate and then adding it as a secret. I'm combining the two because they kind of coincide. First you create it, then you add it as a secret. So creating the certificate is actually not something I'm going to do on this video. But if you're interested in seeing certificate creation, I could create another video for that. There are different ways to approach this because in some cases you need certificates for your services also, not just your TLS. So maybe this is like a video that I can do separately. But I already created a certificate. I'm going to leave a command for creating a self-signed certificate in the description of the video, so you can use that. But for the purposes of this video, I already created that certificate and we're going to add it as a secret. So in the terminal, let's see what we got here. We have a new folder called certs. Let's see what we got in here. And we have 2 files, a CRT and a key. And that was what we're going to need to add a secret. The command to add a secret is a little bit long, so let's go through it together. I'm actually going to type it out and then talk through the command as I'm doing it. So we're going to use kubectl, obviously, as we do for anything. And then we're going to say create. You can use this to create different things, not just secrets. Right? If I say -- help, it'll tell you there are tons of things you can do with this command, with the create command. But really what we're interested in is creating a TLS secret. And for that, we want to say secret. Then we want to tell it what type of secret. Now, if you recall, I had a basic auth secret that I created before for the Postgres database. Well, in this case, we're going to be creating a TLS secret for the TLS certificate. Next, we have to name it something. So I'm just going to call it ingress-tls. It's very self-explanatory what that is. Then we're going to say which namespace we're putting the secret in. So we're going to put it in the Homey namespace because that's where all of our ingresses are going to live. And then we want to provide the key and the cert. So I think what these were called were ingress.key, and for the cert, ingress. Sorry, there's a TLS there, right? I think there is. Let's just hope that's correct. All right, so here's the command. kubectl create secret TLS, the name of the secret, which is ingress-tls, the namespace we're creating it in, which is Homey, and then the key and the certificate file. All right. So secret created. Step number 1, complete. You can say kubectl describe secret ingress-tls, and then we gotta specify the namespace, and you can see that it's been created. It has a tls.crt and a tls.key inside. All right, let's clean this up a little bit and let's install the ingress. To install the Nginx controller, it's actually fairly straightforward. They just give you a helm command, which you can copy off of their website, and I have it prepared right here. So I'm just gonna grab that and paste it in here, and here it is. So we have a helm upgrade -- install. This is kind of the same thing as helm install, but in this case, what it's saying is, hey, if a release with this name already exists, upgrade it instead. But if it doesn't, go ahead and install it. And you pass in a bunch of parameters in here, right? So we're pulling the chart from a repository. We're putting it in this ingress nginx namespace. And we're saying that if the namespace doesn't exist, go ahead and create it, right? So if we press enter, it's gonna say, hey, this release doesn't exist, so go ahead and install it now. What it's doing is it's pulling the charts from the repository and then applying them to the cluster. So as you can see, everything is done here. When we go into K8s, we see that the controller is already up and running. You can see it's like 22 seconds up here. So I can barely see that under my webcam. That's like the one thing I noticed in past videos. My webcam was like covering stuff that was critical. Anyway, here's the Nginx controller, and we're done with step number 2. The last step is to create an actual ingress into our Homey API service. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, back in Visual Studio Code, we're looking at the Helm chart for the Homey API. And specifically, we're looking at the ingress.yaml template. There's also the certs folder, which is up here. So this is where the certificate and the key are. But really what we're interested in now is the ingress itself. So there are a couple things you need to know. First of all, it is a kind of ingress. It is in our namespace. It has the same label, which is Homey API. And there are a few annotations that we've also added. So these things are not strictly necessary, and there are a lot of annotations that you can add. These annotations correspond to parameters which you can pass to Nginx. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of things you can configure for an Nginx Ingress controller. For example, in here, I've enabled cores because I may want to hit this with a Nuxt SPA or something like that, right? So I need cores to be enabled. Suffice it to say, you should look at their docs because they have a lot of things you can pass in here. Some things for example, if you have an HTTPS endpoint, you need to tell Nginx that there's an HTTPS endpoint, stuff like that. So that's what that is. Now, there's another parameter here called ingress class name, and this will just say Nginx. Okay, you need this property here. It's like standard to have this. The really interesting part is where we're actually pointing this ingress to, and that's this part right here. First, let's look at the rules. So when someone hits the Nginx ingress controller, the ingress controller is going to look at the rules for every ingress that's created and hooked up to this class name. And they're going to say, hey, somebody hit this domain over here. Let me forward them to this service over here at port 80. Now you see what I did there? It's at port 80. And the reason for that is, if you recall, here we exposed port 80 for the Homey API service. So the ingress must also point to port 80 because that's what the service is listening at. That's the rule for port 80. But we're also saying, hey, this endpoint is protected by an SSL certificate with TLS. And there's a host for that TLS, which we'll go over shortly, which is in the values file. And the secret name, now this is key, the secret name must be the same secret that we just created earlier in step 1 for that TLS certificate. So that's that right here. Okay, so I mean, that's it. That's the ingress. I don't think there's really much more to explain. other than to look at the values. So you're probably wondering what the domain is, right? So I've added that here, and I have called it homie.local. This is something that obviously doesn't exist on the World Wide Web. So what you're gonna need to do for this to work is you're gonna need to add it to your hosts file, so that when you're visiting homie.local, it goes to your cluster instead of to the internet, right? So you're gonna need to kind of intercept that on the system level to point to your cluster. I'm assuming you know how to edit your hosts file. If you don't, you can go ahead and Google that. It's very straightforward. Or ask AI, that's what cool kids do these days. So homie.local is the domain that we are intercepting over here. And that's what the Ingress controller is gonna be looking for. All right, so now that we have the Ingress, let's switch back over to the terminal and let's upgrade our homie.api deployment. So we need to exit out of the certs folder, and let's see what we got in here. We have our homie API. So let's go ahead and go in there. Now, if you recall, there's just a chart and some templates in here. So what we need to do is we need to say helm upgrade, and then say homie API, and then just say dot because we're already in the folder, right? Say that, and we have a deployment. So we really shouldn't be able to see any changes here. Let me zoom in on this so you can see better. We don't really see anything changed here because we didn't upgrade the deployment or anything, but we should now be able to see an ingress. So let's just check to make sure that we have an ingress. Okay, there you go. Homie API-ingress at homie.local, and it's listening at ports 80 and 443. Great, that's kind of what we're looking for. So last thing we got to do, of course, is to test to make sure that this ingress actually works. So I've already edited my host file, so homie.local actually points to my cluster. Let's switch into Bruno and see if we can create a user instead of pointing at localhost 8080 at homie.local. All right, over in Bruno, we are looking at the register user endpoint. And if you recall, we've registered Jill V at umbrella.com before. Really what we got to do is we got to change this to point to the new homie.local URL that we've mapped, right? So let's go ahead and delete that and say homie.local. And then we don't actually need port 80 because that's the default port. And we also want to say HTTPS, right? Because we've got an SSL certificate. So I'm expecting this to not work. And I'm going to show you guys in a moment why that is. So let's go ahead and save that and then press send. Now you see it doesn't quite work. There's a reason for that. And that reason is specific to Minikube. So let's go back to our terminal real fast. You can see in here that K8s is running the Ingress controller. We are also running the deployment. So why aren't we able to hit that URL? Well, here's the deal. Minikube actually needs something called a tunnel. Very, very simple command. We just type in Minikube tunnel and press enter. When we do that, you see down here, it says starting tunnel for service homie API-ingress. That is the ingress that we just created, and Minikube is aware of it, so it's creating an ingress for it. Now, let's switch back to Bruno and try again. All right, we sent the request and we get a 200 OK. So it means that the user was created successfully. Let's go ahead and look at PGAdmin now just to verify that this isn't tripping and everything is okay. Now you see here we're pointing to homie.local, right? We're not pointing to localhost or anything like that. All right, here we are in PGAdmin 5 years later after it loaded. And if we open up our databases, we see we have our HomieDB. We look in here, we look at schemas because we have just a public schema. We look at our tables and our users. Let's take a look at what kind of data we got in here. Now I added a user called K8s. So we should have 2 users in here. And in fact, we do. So we have one that we added here, and then we have one that we added in a previous video. There you go. We've added a record by using homie here, and we were looking at homie.local. That's where we were pointing our request, HTTPS to boot, not localhost 8080. So this is the end of the series. We've successfully deployed an application with a database. We've done a database migration, created a whole cluster up in Minikube. We've installed K8s to monitor what's going on in the cluster. And we've also now installed an SSL certificate and ingress controller, and we're able to hit our application without using port forwarding or any other magic like that. So that's it. We're done. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the comments under any video in this series. And if you'd like to see any derivative videos from any of the other content we've done here, perhaps anything about certificates or entity framework migrations or anything like that, again, post the questions, and maybe if the question is deep enough with enough meat on the bone, I may make another video about that. But for now, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.